Get a picture of my girls there. Let me get that. All right. Okay. Thanks, everybody. My name is Jamon Holmgren, and I am the CTO and co-founder of Infinite Red. I come from the rainy northwest of USA, over near Portland, Oregon, and it's my first time in, well, any of the Nordic countries, which I really love it here so far. It's very cool. I assume you have weather like this all the time, right? Yes. Okay, good. I'm half Finnish and some Norwegian as well, so it's sort of like coming home in some ways. I don't speak your languages, though. You can follow me on Twitter at Jamon Holmgren, depending on how this talk goes. If it goes well, then you might want to. And you can find my company at infinite.red. We are a consultancy, mostly known for our React Native work. And that's what my talk is going to be about here today, is some of the components of React Native. But we also do React, JS, web, and we have a design team, and we do some back-end work too. We come from, Ruby, and we do some Elixir, so we have kind of a whole litany of things. My background is software engineering. I've been doing it for about, professionally for about 14 years, but really since I was 12. And speaking of young boys, my son Cedric is here. He's 14, and he got to come with me to Finland. So kind of a cool experience. So I'm going to jump into this now by talking a little bit about, well, actually, first off, how many people here have done React Native to some extent? Okay, a fair amount, like maybe half. That's really cool. So just in case there's anybody here who doesn't know React Native, particularly, maybe you've heard of it, but you don't know exactly what it is. It's an implementation of React that instead of targeting the DOM, the web, in a web browser, it actually targets native views. So it will actually construct views in Java or Objective-C and actually render those using the native libraries like UIKit on iOS and the Android layout system on Android. Additionally, there are other build targets that are not officially supported, including Windows. You can actually build Windows apps using React Native Windows, which my team has actually helped Microsoft work on. We helped them port it actually back all the way to Windows 7. And so it's a pretty cool system. React Native itself was announced by Facebook in early 2015, I think March, somewhere in there. And it came with a WebView implementation built in. So this was in core. And over time, many third-party forks of this internal WebView implementation kind of came to be within the open source community. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit here. And then September of last year, I extracted the WebView from the core React Native repository, and now it lives somewhere else, and I'll talk about that as well. So that's sort of the history of WebView. So what is the WebView? Well, the WebView is, so as I said, you render to the native UI libraries, right? Like iOS, it'd be UIKit. But what if you actually want to render a website? You don't have a browser, right? You're actually you're hitting UIKit. You're not rendering divs and spans and hrefs and all those things that you might want to use in a website. What if you actually want to show either some HTML and CSS or actually show like a website? So one of the common things that we get from our clients, we build apps as a consultancy. We build apps for clients, and one of the things that we'll get from them is, hey, we want to show this particular screen that's on our web app, or maybe it's on our website, like our terms and conditions or something like that. You tap this button and it actually would show the web version of it. So that's where the WebView comes from. It actually embeds a thin browser. And when I say browser, I don't mean like what you would what you would pull up with Safari or Chrome. This is like the most bare bones piece of it. This is the rendering view, right? It does have some APIs that you can hit to, go back or navigate to a new URL or whatever. But these are built into UIKit and Android. So on Android, it's called WebView. And on iOS, there were two. There's one called UI WebView that originally came with UIKit, and then there's one called WK WebView, which is part of the newer WebKit API. So essentially, all of that code is underneath, and what you can then do is simply import the WebView from React Native, and then render it, give it a URI, and it will navigate to that, and then you can interact with it like any other component and manipulate what it's doing. So at Infinite Red, we actually, the company technically officially started in October of 2015, and React Native for Android was released just prior, like the month before. So when we merged, we decided we were going to actually start using React Native for our consultancy clients. And over the last, I guess it's 3.5 years now, we have grown to, we have 15 React Native developers. I think there's about 30 of us altogether. And we released a boilerplate for React Native, which I will be talking about at React Finland on Friday, actually, called Ignite. You can find that github.com/infinitered/ignite. So this has, I think it's getting close to 10,000 stars on GitHub. It's a boilerplate for spinning up a new React Native app, and it comes with all of Infinite Red's opinions built in, all of our learnings over the last 3.5 years. You're going to get the benefit of that. What it typically does, I think the quickest way to explain it is it fast forwards your new project, your new app that you're building in React Native by about 2 to 4 weeks. So you just land wherever you would have been in 2 to 4 weeks. There's also Reactatron, little known secret, but it's a very cool app. It's a Mac, Windows, and Linux desktop app that allows you to debug and develop right alongside your code editor any sort of React app, especially if you're using Redux or MobX state tree. It's a very cool desktop app, so if you get a chance to take a look, go ahead and look at it. We also put on Chain React. Chain React is a React Native focused conference hosted in Portland, Oregon. It's coming up in mid-July. Is anybody going to Chain React from here? Cedric, raise your hand. All right, well, we at least have one. That's why I brought him. Definitely consider coming. It's the only React Native focused conference in the US. There is one in Europe, React Native EU, put on by our friends at CallStack. And they do a good job with that in Poland, but they also come to our conference and we go to theirs. I'm actually going to be in Poland in September for React Native EU. So if you do go to that conference, I may see you there. We get about 500 developers there to Chain React. So all about React Native. You can see that we're very invested in React Native. We also do React Web, but React Native is definitely what we're known for. So this sort of plays into the talk that I'm giving tonight. How does Facebook use React Native? Well, first off, the easiest way that I tell my family and friends who aren't developers is if you go and look at your Facebook app and you pull it up and you tap into the Marketplace tab, that's the entire, everything within the Marketplace tab is written in React Native. So if you go in there, you should be able to use it just like any other app, whether you're on Android or iOS, but that's using React Native under the hood. Facebook has a giant monorepo, and I don't think they're using Lerna. They have something that they use internally. They're very vague about it usually, but that affects how they develop React Native, because there's an internal React Native, there's a copy of React Native internally. pretty much set to master of what you see in open source. And they actually use it from master. They don't use the latest. They don't use like 0.59 or whatever it's on right now. They actually use from master in their, like if they ship every 2 weeks, that's going to have the latest master on it. They also have 5+ other internal and external apps that use React Native entirely. So they're written from the ground up using React Native. So Facebook has particular needs with React Native, and of course, they are the biggest, and to them, the most important customer of React Native. So when you do a pull request to React Native, what happens? Well, first off, they'll maybe see it. And this, I want to rewind a little bit because things have changed in the last year. But let's say that it's a year ago when I was first considering extracting the WebView from the main repo, which is what this talk is about. When a pull request is submitted, someone may look at it. And then when they did look at it, they would look at it through the lens of, does Facebook need this? And I mean, they didn't do it quite that like blatantly, but certainly that was the most important thing on their mind. Does Facebook need this? If Facebook doesn't need this, will it potentially break what we already have? If they don't need it, or if it possibly would break it, then no, sorry, it's just not going to go through. So over time, the open source core of React Native really sort of stagnated. It's sort of like, unless Facebook was working on something and deploying it, open source contributions were just not really going anywhere. Well, I think we were up to, I'm going off of memory, so potentially if someone were to, find the actual number, it may not be quite exact, but I think there were around 700 unmerged pull requests in the React Native repo. There were thousands and thousands of open issues, just sitting there. Nobody had ever responded to them, just like nothing. And many of those, I want to say like 10% at least, were related to the WebView. We felt this at Infinite Red. So we would go to do something. We would start using the WebView because we had to. And all of a sudden, we'd run into a problem. This doesn't work on Android. Or they don't support this. Why don't they support this? That's weird. Don't they need it? Apparently not. So they had all these issues sitting there, stagnating. So how did the community then deal with that? Well, we made forks. We made lots and lots and lots of WebView forks. Doing a search yielded over 300 WebView forks, React Native WebView of some sort. These are some of the most popular: React Native WebView Bridge, React Native WK WebView. That was made because Facebook was still shipping with UI WebView, which was deprecated and going to be going away. And right up to the very last moment, they were still shipping React Native with the UI WebView, which was slower and less secure and just altogether not a great thing. React Native WebView Android, because none of the others supported Android. But React Native WebView Android did not support iOS. So there was nothing that was for both. It was really a mess. And when I would talk to my developers, and they would be like, I'm trying to build this, but I have to use this fork for this thing, and then I have to use this other fork for this other thing, and it really doesn't. I mean, what's the big promise of React Native? You could learn how to write React code and then deploy it to anywhere, right? iOS, Android, Windows. You can even deploy it back to web if you use React Native Web. So, but this was obviously not living up to, not up to that ideal, at least not even iOS and Android. This got the attention of the internal Facebook core team. I'm involved with the core team. I'm in their sort of core Discord. I talk with them regularly, and I report back to them sort of what my developers are feeling and what I'm hearing in the community. It's a good feedback loop that happens. And they listened. They got some new leadership, and they listened, and they realized that there's got to be a better solution than whatever's happening right now with the React Native core. And even more than about WebView, this is about that transformation. This transformation about, I would say about a year ago. Not quite a year ago. So what was that better solution? It was the Slimmening. They eventually renamed it to Lean Core. So Lean Core. Lean Core is the initiative within React Native's team to extract as much functionality that is non-essential from React Native itself. Because clearly, having a kind of a monolith system that came with all these different things that sounded great, right? You get all this cool functionality, but oh, by the way, we're not going to advance any of it. It's all going to stay right where it was when we released it. That didn't work so well. So the idea there was we, and I'm speaking as like Facebook at that time, are going to focus on the core of what React Native is, like the core technology, and then allow people to build add-ons, third-party packages that then you can bring and you can maintain in a much better way because that's your focus and you actually care about it. And then Facebook will do the parts that are kind of the heavy lifting in some ways. They're working on things like Fabric, Turbo modules, some other things that if you look into the React Native community, it's very exciting what's coming up. A lot of that will be announced at Chain React, but you won't hear it because you won't be there. That's okay, we'll record and you can watch later. So that's called Lean Core. Additionally, we created a community, github.com/React Native community. This was essentially where once you extract them, where do they go, right? Where do the pieces of React Native that were internal in the main repo before, where are they going to live? So we created a new community. And I will mention that Microsoft and Amazon and of course Infinite Red and CallStack and a bunch of other companies are really what this community is about. There's a lot of companies that are invested in React Native and we want it to succeed. And because of that, that's what the React Native community is all about. This is where we're combining efforts. Within that community, we created a new repository for RFCs, or discussions and proposals is what it was called. So there needed to be some way that we could formally make a proposal and get it actually reviewed by the core team, discuss it, and actually see, is this something that we, that we actually want to do? Is that, maybe we want to extract something, maybe we want to add something, maybe we want to change something. There needed to be a central place for doing this. There were some forums, there were some chat rooms, there were some, just certainly like React Native, just issues, but none of those were very good for various reasons. Either they were too ephemeral, or they potentially, like in the case of React Native issues, just became too much. There were just too much noise. You would have your very important discussion about, something core right along someone who couldn't get it to install on Windows 7 or something. So this discussions and proposals repository became the center, and I submitted the first RFC 0001, which was to extract the WebView from the core repository. So we had talked about this internally within our Discord, and I had volunteered that my team would, well, it ended up being me, but that my team would take this on and be responsible for creating a copy, another fork of WebView, but this time it would be the standard one. Essentially the goal in what I laid out in this RFC was to maintain backwards compatibility, make it a drop-in replacement for the existing WebView. This is something that we're trying to do with all of the Lean Core extractions. So whenever someone extracts a piece from React Native itself, this is actually probably a little bit hard to read, but as you can see here, you're importing WebView from React Native, or normally that's how you get components to use from core, and all you would have to do is import it from React Native WebView. So you're switching what you're importing from. That's it. That's all you'd have to do. And otherwise, it would just work. Everything would work the same. No backwards incompatibilities, etc. At least this was the initial goal. Try to get it to that point at least, and get the community moving off of the internal core version. Facebook blessed this. They said this was a good idea. They liked the motivation behind it, which I will actually just read this for you. The current WebView implementation is used by Facebook internally, but not actively updated. This leads, understandably, to a lack of first-class support for this core API. By moving the component to a third party that is more invested in supporting it, there will be better support. That was the idea. Facebook was very happy about this because they're seeing all these pull requests come in, they're seeing all these issues coming in, they're handling the criticism that's coming in, but they didn't have the bandwidth nor the inclination to continue to move the WebView forward. And there were a lot of major issues with it. Additionally, we wanted to, the fragmentation, all of the different WebView forks that were out there were in various states. Some of them were really good at one thing, some of them were good at other things. And they weren't really working together. There wasn't really any kind of common movement within them. Additionally, some of them would get to a certain point and then the person would maybe move on to some other tech or not be working on that anymore, and then it would just die. And that doesn't work. That doesn't work very well, especially when you have mission critical apps that are relying on it every time that you have to switch to a new one, it becomes a problem. Also, many of them were not API compatible. So they approved the RFC, and I started the work of extracting the WebView from there. Luckily, I do have a background in Objective-C and Java. I do a lot of JavaScript these days. That's primarily what I do. But I know enough of Objective-C and Java to reduce the amount of times I shoot myself in the foot when I'm working with it. So this was interesting because the WebView, as it was implemented within React Native, actually had tentacles everywhere within the system. There were a lot of different things where it was pulling from different parts and pieces. Not only was there Objective-C and Java, but there was also JavaScript, of course. And so working within 3 different languages, and I had to extract all of that. I had to maintain compatibility and work with the core WebView that would not be extracted and is still not extracted today. I extracted, I should say, but it's not removed from the original one. This is because Facebook still relies on the internal one. So they are planning eventually to move to ours. They recognize that ours is much better, more stable, better in so many other ways, but this is just the state of things right now. So I had to avoid naming collisions, because if we had, for example, an iOS class, so in JavaScript it's pretty nice. You just do the import from the other place, and it's a local reference, and you don't have like a global namespace collision. In Java, it's not a big deal because you have namespacing. But in Objective-C, you may notice if you work in Objective-C, you get all these like prefixes and class names. Like UIKit has like UI WebView. That's because they didn't have, within Objective-C, an old language, any sort of namespacing. So everything is in the global namespace. So I couldn't just name it, RCT WebView, I think is what it was called, React WebView. I had to name the new one something else. And I had never written, remember, I'm CTO, so that means that I really don't do a lot of coding anymore, which is unfortunate. But so I had to kind of brush off some of my software engineering skills and remember how exactly does this work? How does it even get across the bridge? There's a JavaScript bridge that has to happen there. There were a lot of different pieces that happened within extracting WebView. But I got it to a certain point, got it to render my website, infinite.red, and it was very exciting. I think I tweeted about it very excitedly, and it was not long after that I had something ready to go, and it felt like it was actually in a pretty good place. So that was the extraction. I did that in, I think I got done with that in about September of last year. Since that time, I've been working with my co-maintainer who came on shortly after I extracted, Thibaut Malbranche. He's French. and he is a very cool guy. You can follow him on Twitter, TITOZZZ. And he actually has done the bulk of the heavy lifting ever since. He's been really dedicated to keeping WebView up to speed. He works for a company called Brigade, I think, and they're a French company, and they use the WebView pretty intensively internally with their app. So they're invested in making sure that the WebView works really well. I also have internal React Native developers within Infinite Red that have used it for various projects and contributed back, including Ryan Linton, who is one of my senior software engineers. We have drastically improved the stability and the power of React Native WebView, both on iOS and Android. 165 merged pull requests, 71 new releases since we did that in the last, I don't know how many months now. Over 57 contributors, so it's not just Thibaut and myself doing the work. Generally how we do it is we say, issue, okay, I verified that, yeah, this is happening. Please give a pull request. This is how this works. They would provide a pull request. We test it. We make sure that it's up to quality, and then eventually we merge it. We have an auto deployment strategy using semantic release, which has worked really, really well. And I'd love to talk more about that at some other time. And so when we merge, a new version goes out. It's semantically versioned and has release notes built in. So we've been using this internally, and it's been a much better experience using the React Native WebView and across the board, including actually Facebook themselves in the WebView documents actually put a notice at the top, hey, you're in the wrong place, go to the React Native community and go to React Native WebView. So speaking of Facebook and the community, there's been a much better, since that time, there's been a much better working relationship between Facebook's React Native core team and the React Native community. I've been very, very pleased with the difference between a year ago and today. A year ago, I was actually feeling pretty down about some things. It felt like Facebook didn't really care about certain things that the community really needed, and that has really totally changed. Remember how I said there were about, I think, around 700 open pull requests? That's down to 50. I just looked, 50. They have, and they didn't just go through and close them all. They actually merged almost, the valid ones. Under 500 open issues, and they've addressed them. They actually organize hackathons with the core team, get together and just knock out pull requests, new features, things like that. They're working on some really cool stuff, including some native integration, like module discovery, that really kind of makes your path of working between JavaScript and either Objective-C or Java much, much easier. So it's been a much better working relationship. Lean core itself, there's discussions about, I think, around 50 components. There's a spreadsheet, which I don't expect you to read. But there's just a big spreadsheet full of components that are in various stages of planning for extraction. A bunch of them have already been extracted and are being maintained by the community right now. That's been going really well. And what's really cool is that all of those other extractions, community-supported components, have looked to the WebView as sort of a model of how to do it because of how successful that process went. So that's essentially the end of my talk. I want to say thanks to React Helsinki for having me here, Smartly.io for hosting. Really awesome that you provide your space. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at Jamon Holmgren. My company is infinite.red. Please do come to Chain React. I think you'd have a wonderful time there. Portland is amazing in July, and the venue is awesome. And I will be speaking at React Finland about Ignite and the community that we've built around Ignite. So perhaps I'll get a chance to see you there. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions?